is the scariest thing you've ever seen in your life that you can't explain? Story 1. About 25 years ago, my now former wife and I were caretaking a house. We had been there for several weeks and we both noticed that we always had that feeling coming up the stairs from the cellar that something was going to grab you as soon as you turn the light switch off. Everything else about the house was normal. We slept with an analog wind-up alarm clock next to the bed, the kind that actually ticks. To set the alarm, you move a tiny third hand to the location on the clock face for the desired time, for example, halfway between 6 and 7 to awaken at 6:30. It's a physical process and there is very little way to get it wrong. We always had the clock set to wake us up at 6 a.m. It was not something we fiddled with on a daily basis. One night, the alarm clock went off at like 2 in the morning, old school ringing bells. Both my former wife and I woke up absolutely terrified. I saw a small figure maybe 2 feet tall run out of the room. I thought I must have been crazy until my former wife screamed, "Did you just see that thing?" We both described it as some sort of small gremlin. When we looked at the alarm clock, we saw that the alarm hand had been moved from 6 a.m. to 2 a.m. That's the whole story. Scared the out of me, have no explanation for it. Nothing else ever happened there, but the cellar feeling persisted. Story 2. Once I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of my bedroom door creaking open. I could see the outline of someone standing there, but when I turned on the light, there was no one there. The door was still slowly closing, as if whoever or whatever had been there was leaving. Even creepier, my Nest fire alarm had illuminated in the corridor, sensing movement, but there was nobody there. Still gives me chills thinking about it. Story 3. So in college I studied in the UK. I lived in a house with a group of other American students that had stories of the ghost of a girl who passed away while living there. I never believed in any of it, but it was fun to play along. The kitchen had one way in and out, and right after you entered the kitchen to your right was a padlocked door to the cellar where she allegedly lived. I had the only key. We were all a little homesick near Thanksgiving, so decided to do a meal together. This required some creative cooking schedules due to small appliances in the kitchen. So one girl who didn't have class the next day offered to stay up late to get the turkey going. We went into the cellar the first and only time that evening to get larger cooking implements. At 2:04 in the morning, I wake up to my door rattling, like someone was pushing against it. I assumed it was a housemate who just went to the wrong door. About 30 seconds later when I hear a scratchy female voice softly saying hello, every 5 seconds or so. My window was open, and it sounded like it was coming from outside, so I get up to close my window as I assume it's some drunk girl walking back from the pub. I get to the window, and there's no one there, and then I hear hello, clear as a bell behind me. My door rattles again, and goes silent. I've had night terrors before, and hallucinate when I have even a mild fever, so I assume I'm still asleep and lay back down. The next morning at 7 a.m., the girl who's cooking tells me I had the creepiest night. At 150 I heard footsteps coming up the cellar stairs, then the door rattled. Then at 210 the door rattled again, and I heard footsteps coming down. She told me this before I had said anything to anyone about what I'd experienced. Story 4. I've seen some pretty wild stuff in my life, but most of it is explainable. The one event that comes to mind was witnessed by my dad, brother and myself, and it's a 2-part encounter, but I still consider it one event. This is a bit long and I apologize, but I feel it might be worth the read. It was around 1998. My family and I had just moved into an old clapboard house on the edge of town. It had a huge backyard with a 6-foot wooden privacy fence on one side and a metal chain-link fence about 4-5 feet high around the other 3 sides of the yard. Neighbors on one side the privacy fence side a small grass alley that ran behind the back with a streetlight, and then another yard, etc. Our bedroom was an old converted sunroom on the back of the house that faces the backyard. It had floor-to-ceiling windows all along the back wall looking into the backyard. We didn't have many options as to where to place our beds, so my headboard was against the windows, and my brother's bed was about 8 feet away with his headboard against the opposite wall with the foot of the bed facing the windows. One night we were up pretty late. I was in my bed and he was in his, just talking about random things, when suddenly he got quiet. I figured he fell asleep, but then I heard him whispering in a shaky breath. So I'm like, what? And I hear him whisper again. So again I'm like, speak up, I can't hear you, and he goes, don't move, and be quiet, in a forced whisper, but I, thinking he's messing with me, I'm like, bitch, why? And I'm looking at him, and mind you, my head is to the windows and he's pointing into the backyard behind my bed. So quickly sit up and turn around and see this huge dog head staring almost nose to glass through the window right behind my bed. I'm almost nose to nose with this thing. Just a single pane of glass and about 10 inches of empty air separate me for this thing. Now when I say I screamed, I mean I screamed, not my proudest moment, but hey, I was like 10 years old. Well anyways, the thing quickly ducked under the window and then ran to the side of the yard and jumped the 4-5 foot chain link fence and bolted off into the darkness. My dad came running into the room with our mom right on his heels. We were able to get out that something was looking through our window, so dad ran back to his room and grabbed his shotgun and then headed out the side door of the house and into the backyard. Unfortunately, or fortunately, he didn't find anything. Wrote it off as I had a nightmare, and my brother wouldn't admit to seeing anything, so I took the blame and was told to quit messing around, go back to bed, typical parent response, etc. Well, later that night, maybe an hour or so after I begged my parents to let me sleep in the living room because leaving the house wasn't an option and still being refused, I was made to sleep in my room. So again my brother and I are in our room with these floor-to-ceiling windows. We are just completely rattled. We are both huddled in his bed staring out the windows when we see this thing come walking along the chain link fence on all fours, and the fence only comes up to its mid-shoulder, so this thing is huge. It sniffs the ground, does a few circles, and then hops the fence into the backyard like it's nothing. It walks over to the window and again gets nose to the glass like it's trying to see in. We are panicking the whole time. Well, my brother is like, fuck this, and soon as he steps off the bed we hear this loud bang and there is a flash of light. The thing at the windows gets knocked sideways, and without even missing a beat it turns and runs across the full length of backyard, jumps the back chain link fence. It cleared the fence, the alleyway, and then landed in the back neighbor's yard. This is easily a 15 to 20 foot jump minimum, clearing their fence like it was nothing, and was gone at a dead run. Up beside that house and off into the darkness on the other side. My dad comes tearing around the side of the house with his shotgun in hand and makes a mad dash for the side door and slams it shut behind him. He is screaming and hollering, we gotta go. We pack up and head to a hotel that night. My mom absolutely refused to believe we saw what we said we saw, and we only lived there for about 6 months. It rattled my dad so much he didn't even want to come back. He told my mom that we were just gonna move that next day, but she wouldn't allow it. After about 6 months she conceded and we moved. Mind you, this is in the coastal plains region of Texas. We have no large wild canines here. We have stray dogs and coyotes, but nothing that would even remotely touch on how big this thing was. My dad swears he shot that thing with a slug from about 15 feet away with his 12-gauge shotgun right underneath its left arm, hitting it in the ribs where its vital organs are, and nothing, it just ran off. He said the thing that freaked him out the most was that when he saw the thing jump the fence, it walked towards our window crouched, but still on its hind legs. It wasn't walking on all fours, and then when it got to our window it stood up straighter, and he could tell that while it looked like a dog its body was shaped wrong. He said it looked like a really stocky person wearing a dog suit, but he could tell it wasn't a suit. Also that when it was walking in circles sniffing the ground before coming into our yard the second time, it wasn't actually sniffing the ground like for a scent. It was staring at our window with its face to the ground, like it was acting like it was sniffing the ground, almost as if it was playing a part to see if anyone would notice it. He said he's had dogs his whole life, and everything about what it was doing was wrong. A while later I asked my dad why he was in the backyard, if he thought I was having a nightmare, and he told me my brother is the one that gave it away. He said with how panicked I looked, that my brother was almost white as a sheet and wouldn't take his eyes off the window. He said your brother has never looked so scared and never been one with just making stuff up. So after going back to his room with my mom, as he was laying there thinking about it, he decided that if my brother was as white as he was, then we had to have seen something. So he grabbed his gun in case he had to scare some creeper out of our yard, and figure he was going to go through the garage and out by the far side of the house and sneak to the corner to see if someone was peeking in our windows or if someone was actually messing with us. He never actually thought we saw a huge dog-looking thing, just that maybe with it being dark outside and us being kids with overactive imaginations, maybe we just mistook someone as something. But when he saw that thing come up the side fence and with the street light in the back alley lighting up the backyard, he saw it and it freaked him out. He was going to creep back inside until it went up to our window, and he said as it stood up he just got this instant feeling of just dread, like something was going to happen to us. Story 5. Working in a nursing home for years during the night, and everyone always complained of weird stuff like noises on the top floor. I never believe in any of that, so I was always the one going upstairs to do night checks. One night I was changing a resident on that floor with a colleague, and my colleague complained he heard something like people walking. We were in the resident room and I had to go to the cupboard at end of that corridor to get bed sheets, and when I was coming back with the bed sheets I kept hearing steps, and like if someone was touching and opening plastic bags. I was so annoyed and looked outside the room and saw a shadow passing the corridor. The issue is that the shadow was so big, like if literally a person just passed by, along with step noises and plastic bags. I freak out so badly and froze completely. I had to call another colleague to come upstairs because I was so scared of coming out of the resident room. Bear in mind that I do not believe in those things, and for 2 years I was always the one doing night checks on the top floor and bottom floor on my own. Never had any problem and never saw something. Since that day I never went upstairs alone and was always very scared. Story 6. When I was 9 years old I was biking home in the evening. We lived in the countryside up a small mountain. The road from the village was an uphill, a flat section, and then another uphill. The road lights only stretched to the end of the flat section. I was a bit afraid of the dark, so I stopped at the end of the road lights just at the bottom of the last uphill to gather courage to bike the last section home. It was a partial moon, so it wasn't pitch black, and at the end of the uphill I saw a figure walking down towards me. I thought I'd wait until Husha got closer, as I would feel less afraid to bike in the dark if there was someone else close, but about halfway down the hill the person walked into a thin shadow of a tree on the road and never came back out, just disappeared. I stood there for a while trying to figure out what I just saw, and then panicked and biked down to the village and stayed there until my parents came driving and wondered why I never came home. They tried to explain it with stuff like the person might have gone into the woods or something. What they didn't disclose though, out of fear that I'd never dare to bike home again, was that my father had seen the same thing walking home from work. He had seen her clear as day, walking down the hill for a while. When he looked down for just a second and looked up, she was gone, and there were no footsteps in the fresh snow. I later read a book about local legends, and apparently a lot of people during at least a century have seen her walking down the hill and disappearing halfway down. My youngest daughter loved this story, so we've been on ghost stakeouts, where we buy pizzas and snacks and hang out at the bottom of the hill, listening to the Ghostbusters theme song and try to see the ghost. Story 7. This isn't my story, it's my uncle's. A bit of backstory. He used to work on the London Underground doing maintenance to the tracks tunnels etc. Once he went into a tunnel with 2 other colleagues. They'd stopped to do something, and this man said to my uncle like, "Hey, uncle's name, can you show me the way out?" My uncle, thinking it was one of his guys, said, "You know the way out." I think he was so engrossed in his work that he didn't turn around to see this bloke to start with. So this guy says, "I'm so cold." Then my uncle said he immediately felt dead cold and the air around him dropped. Not sure what he meant by that. So my uncle turns round and shines a light on him. My uncle said to me this bloke is what he would call a ghost standing there. He was holding a really old vintage lamp and wearing a really old dirty uniform. He said the feeling he got was so strange, as if he knew this bloke was a ghost. The bloke just kept saying over and over again, "I'm so cold. I'm so cold." My uncle eventually said to this guy, "I don't think you're supposed to be here, mate. Can you see a light anywhere?" And he looked dead at my uncle and said, "Can you help me? I'm so cold." I'm unsure if the colleagues came to see who my uncle was talking to, but one of them tried to approach this bloke thinking it was someone in their team playing a joke, and this bloke just disappeared right in front of their eyes. All of them freaked out and ran. They refused to go back into the tunnel. My uncle and 2 colleagues refused to go down that tunnel again. Some other colleagues have said they've seen this bloke and he always says how cold he is. My uncle's retired now but says he thinks of this bloke from time to time. Story 8. My friend and I were driving from a gig we played in Kona on the big island of Hawaii. We were driving on Saddle Road, one of 2 roads from Kona to the other side of the island to Hilo Town. Saddle Road is known for being a spiritual place and lots of weird things there. This stretch of land is about 40 kilo with no lights or population. Just lava rock. We drove over the road about 1 a.m., we were talking stories and having a good time. Then we saw on the side of the road a huge white dog wearing a gold chain staring at us. We passed and asked if we saw the same thing. We were debating about stopping on the side of the road to pick it up. The local legend is that if you see an old lady on the road you need to pick her up or something bad will happen. We didn't stop, and didn't speak until we got home. I asked another local guy what could that have been. He said it was the goddess Pele's pet. Did some research. Looks like this dog has been seen sporadically since the 1950s. Story 9. I've shared this story on Reddit before and I've been thinking about a lot lately. It's not exactly a scary thing I saw, but I still wonder about it all the time. So we'll copy and paste here. My best friend and I would always talk about crazy dreams we had. Never thought much of it until he told me about one where he got hit by a car and died. We were about 15 to 16 when he told me about the dream. We were into conspiracies. Stuff like aliens, paranormal, lucid dreaming, so we'd talk about stuff like that a lot, and he died right before he would have turned 20. He said he was riding a skateboard wearing all black when the car hit him and could see everyone at his funeral. He even said his crush was at his funeral and laughed about it. He just kept going on about how it was so real, and it really shook me up until eventually I forgot about it. Then a few years later, after I'd long forgot about the dream he told me about, it happened for real. His crush was at his funeral. He did get hit by a car and die. He was wearing all black like in the dream, his work clothes, and he was riding my skateboard. It was all true. I still don't know what to make of it all. Every single detail I remember from his dream came true, and I'm sure there's parts of it he told me that I don't remember. I felt crazy. I didn't tell anyone about. I just don't know why or how he saw it happen in his dream, and think what if he never told me about it. It just left me with so many questions. But I guess now I have proof, at least to myself, that our souls go on after we die. I just wish I knew why he experienced that dream and told me about it. Like there had to be some kind of reason. I just think about how I wouldn't believe this story if I hadn't experienced it for myself. Has anyone ever experienced anything similar? Story 10. My grandfather had just died a few days earlier, and my mom was crying one night in our kitchen. I started hugging her. We had a lot of my grandfather's belongings, but there was this broken radio that didn't even have working batteries in it on the table, along with other things like photos and clothes he previously owned. This is the only unexplainable thing I've ever experienced. But while my mom was bawling crying, the radio made a very loud static noise for about a second. We both stared in silence at it. It was eerie. She stopped crying because even she heard it. We both just went to bed after that and haven't spoke of it since. I'd imagine if it was something paranormal, it was my grandfather letting us know he's here. But who knows? Story 11. When I was a child, both my parents went to work early, so they would drop me off at my grandmother's to eat breakfast and go to school from there. My grandmother died my junior year in high school, and I started coming straight home from school. During this time, my mother started complaining that when she get home from work the receiver of the phone, an 80s-style corded push-button phone next to her bed, was left off the base. I wasn't using the phone, but she would insist I must have because the phone was hung up properly when she left for work. One day, I got home a little early. Now I need to pause and tell you about the layout of our apartment. From the front door, I looked directly into the living room, dining room, the door to the kitchen, and the short halfway that led to my parents' bedroom and my bedroom. There was no other door. The windows were old-fashioned narrow casement windows with screens, and we were on the 3rd floor anyway. As soon as I walked in the door, I clearly heard 2 footsteps in my parents' bedroom. I dropped my school bag and foolishly ran to the bedroom. It wasn't far and took only a few seconds. I got to the bedroom and no one was there. However, I immediately noticed that the receiver of the phone on my mother's bedside table was on the floor. It was placed so that the cord to the base was stretched out as far as it could go. I later tried to replicate the placement by shaking the table, tipping the phone, etc. I could never get the receiver off the base. When I finally resorted to knocking it off with a finger, it would fall on the table or next to it. The only way I could replicate the placement of the receiver where I found it was to carefully stretch the cord, place it, and hold it for a few moments. It could not have gotten to that spot by accident. When I found the phone, I hung it up and it immediately rang. I answered it, and it was my dad. He asked what was wrong. I asked him why he asked. He said he had called apparently just before I got home and someone he thought it was me answered the phone but never said anything. He finally hung up and had been trying to call back and only got through after I hung up the phone. I've never figured out what happened. I definitely heard footsteps and am just as certain there was no one there. No one went by me. The windows in the bedroom were not disturbed, and my parents had too much stuff under the bed and in the closet for anyone bigger than an infant to hide in either spot. Also, after this, my mother never found the phone disturbed again. Story 12 brought home a 3-foot-tall realistic doll my grandparents had, with the intention of fixing it up. I'm scared of dolls, so I put it in a box and put a heavy metal box on top of it. Next morning the doll was gone. The boxes were still in place, but the thing had disappeared completely. I live in fear. Story 13. Okay, so not something I saw, but something I was told someone else saw. Hey, race the story. My ex-GF passed away years ago. Before she passed, me and brother lived together, and my brother had a big pit bull named Max. Max was an awesome dog, and she was a big animal lover, and she knew Max very well. I eventually moved out. He got a GF who had a kid and needed the space. Okay, that's established. Of note, my ex-GF had long blonde hair, was in her 30s, and she was buried in a pink sweater. A few months after she passed, my brother took them all on a vacation, and asked me if I could watch the dog, feed him, etc. I said yes, of course. They kept him crated, and the crate was in his GF's daughter's room, kind of a big basement room. I hung out with the dog and eventually had to leave, so I put him back in his crate. I felt bad, but I had to. Before I left, I looked up the sky and said, Meg, if you're still around, please keep Max company, he's gonna be lonely. So I go home, my brother comes back, whatever. A few months later, I'm talking to his GF in her 30s and we're talking about ghost stuff. She tells me that her house is haunted. I'm like, no way, I'm there all the time, Eve never seen anything. She explains to me that it seemed to happen out of nowhere. She hadn't seen anything, but her daughter, around 5 or 6 years old, told her that sometimes when Max is barking or freaking out for whatever reason, her daughter tells her she sees a lady about mommy's age with long blonde hair wearing a pink sweater who calms down the dog. I'm pretty sure I invited a ghost in their house, but I'm happy that I did. I wish I could have seen her. Story 14. I was maybe 10 years old, and my grandma had just died. I didn't really know her because she had spent most of my young life in a nursing home and often didn't remember who I was when I went to visit, but when I visited, she would always rub my back. It was sort of like an instinctual comfort thing. She did it to all her kids and grandkids. For about a year after she died, I would be sitting in my room at night, alone, and start to feel someone rubbing my back like she used to. It freaked me out until one night when I acknowledged it and said, "Thank you, Grandma." It stopped after that and I never felt it again. Story 15. I was about to cross the street. A lady put her arm across my chest and said, "Wait." As I look at her trying to figure out what is going on, a car crash happens and one of the cars goes tumbling down the street 2 feet in front of me. If she hadn't stopped me, I would absolutely be dead. I turned to look at her again, and she is no longer there. I could see for blocks in each direction. Nowhere she could have gone that fast where I wouldn't be able to see her. Only thing I can come up with is I imagined it happening in my memory due to how tragic the crash was. Never experienced anything even slightly supernatural before or after. Story 16. I had a dog growing up that was the smartest dog I've ever met. She was like a human trapped in a dog's body. My brother and I found her wandering around our neighborhood after school and we brought her home. She was beloved. My brother died young. After he died, she would walk slowly in a circle around a plant we had in the living room, letting the leaves that hung down gently rub her back. Every once in a while she would stop and look up at the plant for a moment. Like she saw some kind of apparition floating above the plant, she would get a sad look in her eyes and let out a whimper. I'm convinced she was seeing my brother's ghost watching over us. I really loved that dog. Story 17. I might have something for this. When I was young, probably around 10 or so, maybe younger, I was at a family wedding. It was late in the evening, so a full moon was out and it was getting darker. Me and my cousin, who's a year younger, were swinging on this big metal gate thing outside the venue. It was on the entrance to a very, very big field. We noticed a guy very far into the field who was just glowing and radiating white. I mean, his skin, clothes, everything. I remember us standing there like WDF, then we tried to get his attention and shout at him. He stopped, looked in our direction, but he stopped right under the full moon, and pointed up towards the moon while staring at us. We were just in shock and confusion pretty much. After about 10 seconds of pointing, he carried on walking across the field and just disappeared behind a swing set. Even till this day I have no idea what that was. I'm hoping it was some costume or something, but sure didn't look like it. Story 18. It's not scary but unexplainable. When I was 10 I got into a motorcycle accident. I wasn't driving it, I was walking from school when a motorcycle hit me going full speed. I did see the motorcycle come but I froze up and couldn't move. When it had hit me I flew pretty far and remember someone catching me when I fell down. When I got up and looked around, I didn't see anyone and witnesses told the cops I flew at least 6 feet and fell head first on the ground. My head was fine, just had a broken collarbone. Thankfully my parents believed me when I told them. Story 19. Around 2003 I was walking home from work in the afternoon and just happened to look up on an overcast day. Parallel to my direction a meteor burned up, led by a bright burning and leaving black smoke across the whole sky. It made a low-pitched loud rumbling across the whole sky for the 3 seconds it took to travel that far. Before YouTube no one would have believed me, much less heard of anyone who saw it. In hindsight it was wicked cool to see. At the time, I thought I was going to die. I had seen meteor showers. I had never seen one that low, or with any volume. Story 20. I live in the countryside, and when I was a kid, every day I used to go check the chickens that we had in a henhouse in the garden. It was around 8 p.m. in the winter, dark and snow everywhere. I put my shoes on and went outside. Everything went as usual, until I saw it. There was somebody standing in front of me in the dark, or like. I wish it was somebody. That figure was almost 3 meters tall and had red glowing eyes. I told my parents, and until this day nobody believes me. Few years ago I found out the previous owner of our house committed suicide in the same place in our garden years before we moved in. Story 21. Not so scary but unexplainable. At my stepmom's funeral, she was played off with the song I'll Fly Away, from my personal CD of the Oh Brother SDTK. On the way home, I got the disc out to play it, and the disc was broken neatly in half in the case. Story 22. As a kid there was a camp that had a lean-to and an old plywood caravan against it a long way out in the AUS bush from the town I grew up in. One school holidays my friends and I went for a bushwalk and stumbled across it. Didn't look like anyone had been there in months, and we looked in the van. Nothing much but moldy seats and a built-in table. Usual old caravan stuff, so we shut the door because it smelt moldy. As we sat in the shade of the lean-to we heard the doorknob squeak and start turning. Pretty sure my backpack is still sitting there 35 years later because I dropped it and ran. We all scattered in different directions and met up lower down the road an hour later, and we were all still pale. No way anyone was in that van, and no way, still bothers me to this day. Story 23. The basement in my dad's house is finished except for the storage room, which is really dark and creepy and is around the corner from the main room of the basement. There's an elliptical down there, and when standing on the elliptical, if you look over your shoulder, you can see half of the door to the storage room. I was working out on said elliptical, and I felt like someone was standing behind me, so I looked over my shoulder, and in that half doorway, a dark figure with light gray eyes was standing there looking at me. I was house-sitting, so I know there wasn't anyone else home. I slowly got off the elliptical and went into the bathroom to hide, then a while later decided to be bold and rush past the storage room and back upstairs. Not the first time I had seen that gray-eyed figure either. Story 24. My very first job was as a radio DJ at a small hometown radio station in the mid-1990s. This was a tiny building out in the middle of a field with a 500-foot antenna out back and a single road from the main road to the front door. The transmitter was right behind my studio, behind sound dampening glass, and had a light bulb that was always on. The station was so small that you could see the light bulb in the transmitter room all the way from the driveway roadway. There were only 2 doors, the front door and the back door in the transmitter room. That door didn't even have a handle on the outside, and it was always locked from the inside. It's impossible to enter that door from the outside. I worked the evening shift, from 5 p.m. to 10 p.m. After my shift, we actually went off the air for the night. I was always the last person there, so after I went off the air I had to pull commercials for the first hour or two of the morning show, clean dishes, finish up some production work, etc. After working there for a year or so, I had racked up a couple of weird experiences. Shadows scurrying about at the corner of my vision, lights turning off and on. One evening, after getting in and taking over the board, I was just sitting there preparing myself mentally for the next 5 hours. I looked up, out the studio doors towards the front door, and I saw the perfect shadow shape of a man who was probably 6 tall. It was there, then not. I went to my boss, who was not a nice person on her nicest days, and said, "So, I have a weird question." She sighed and looked at me, expecting who knows what. "Have you ever felt like someone was here who wasn't?" My boss yelled across the building for someone to come into her office. When that person arrived, she tilted her head at me. He's seen Jimmy. Supposedly, everyone had seen Jimmy, the original owner of the radio station. He popped in from time to time. He won't hurt you. He's just checking in on the station. So from then on, Jimmy would make his appearances. His was a harmless presence. My studio faced another unused studio, and he would flash the lights on and off a few times. I'd say, "Hi Jimmy, everything's going well," and it would stop. He turned a water faucet on once. He whispered my name in my ear one night, which freaked me out. At least I think it was him. You see, there was another malevolent being that also lived there at the station. It didn't have a name, and it was about shin high. This one always gave me a really bad feeling. It was the one who would dart beside me. Its shadow just in the corner of my eye. I always knew it was there, just because I would feel downright freaked out. One night in particular was the scariest I've ever been. Here it is, 30-ish or so years later, and I still can't explain it. As soon as everyone left the building for the night, I got that feeling like it was there. I just turned on all the lights, turned the music up, and tried to ignore it. The longer the night went on though, the worse it got. Lights were flashing everywhere. A dot matrix printer in the sales office started going on its own, something that never happened. And that office was locked then. Ceiling tiles started moving up as if someone hit them with a broom handle. They started closest to me from my studio, down the hall, and ended at the front door, which was locked. Then the front door opened, a locked door opened. I went down the hall to close and relock it. When I did, I saw through the door window that there was a coffee cup and a cigar on the front stoop. There was no reason for them to be there. On my way back to the studio, I got a big burst of cigar smell like an invisible smoke cloud right in my face. I knew my usual duties were required, but I didn't care at this point. I went off the air, grabbed my keys, and noped right the out of there. I ran to my car, backed up, and looked through the front door. A figure was standing inside, silhouetted in front of the transmitter light. I peeled out and went straight home. Now all of that is screwy. But it's not the most unexplainable thing. Is it 100% impossible someone didn't somehow sneak in and play a very elaborate prank on me? No, there's a slight, minuscule chance someone did, but to this day, I don't know how. It was an old, tiny building, but I still hold the possibility that it could have been a prank. I got home and told my mom this whole story. My heart was still pounding. She was all shooey. Well, it's bedtime, so I go to my bedroom and dial up a BBS to write someone what had happened to me. As I was typing up the story, my modem speaker turned on. If you are old enough to remember dial-up modems, you know the speaker doesn't just turn on once the connection is made. They wouldn't even turn back on if someone in the house picked up the phone. You'd just get a lot of bad data on the screen and your modem would disconnect. The speaker turns on, and a voice comes from the speaker, mixed with the static of the data connection. It screeched, "Help me." The speaker then turned off, and nothing else changed on my screen. That speaker turning on and the voice coming out is solidified in my brain. I remember the screech like it was yesterday. I have no explanation for it. My mom was the only other person in the house, and she wouldn't have done something like that. She couldn't have done something like that. It was the scariest night of my life. I am as skeptical as you can be about anything ghost or UFO related, but that night is beyond my ability to explain. As kind of a footnote to all of this, I go back to that station every now and then when I go home to visit. I still know some people who work there. Jimmy is still active and is well known by the staff, the little scary one. No one else has reported seeing him. I have one story, though I can explain it. I used to work as a security guard for an office building. Every once in a while, I'd do my rounds. Building would be completely empty except for me. Then I'd sit at the security desk and watch the cameras. But then the CFO would suddenly appear on the cameras, on the first floor. He would literally just appear in his office. Even after I had checked his office was empty, he'd walk around the first floor for a bit, go back to his office and completely disappear again. I'd go around the first floor, but I'd never see him in person. I'd only ever see him on the cameras. Used to scare the out of me. I ended up recording the CCTV and showed the security supervisor it, which led to HR questioning him about sneaking into the office after dark. Turned out, behind some filing cabinets in his office there was this little hatch door which led to this vertical passageway with a ladder that was connected to the basement. Guy got divorced the month before lost the house. He was living in that tiny passageway with a sleeping bag.